So the slides that you're going to look at right now are the needs assessment for a continuing education program. That's one of your big assignments, is looking at how to invent a computer or a continuing education program for yourself. So the first thing you're going to look at are frame factors, and there are internal and external frame factors. The external frame factors are things like the system that you're working in, nursing workforce, regulatory agencies, and the need for the program. I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of those. I just want to say again, though, that these slides are an adjunct to your readings. So in your book, it's very clearly spelled out how to assess the factors, the frame factors. So don't think that these slides are the only thing that are going to guide you through your continuing ed program development, because you won't be successful. So external frame factors, the healthcare system, that's looking at what the environment you're working in and where you're going to do your presentation. So it can be a hospital, a clinic, a private office. That's the system, is where you want to look to say, why is there a program being done? Who is my audience? And how is it going to affect the system? Is the system going to be affected by my doing this program? Or will this system be an influence in the program that you're going to develop? The workforce, you want to look for things like partners in the community. If you're doing a presentation, you may want to involve other groups of people. You may want to invite other nursing people if you're doing a nursing workforce or nursing continuing ed program. You may also want to invite other disciplines if you think it's applicable. So you always want to look at that, because those can be additional resources also for you. Sometimes we have to look at regulatory agencies. So if you have a regulatory agency that's involved, and who doesn't? Everybody has regulatory agencies overseeing them. You want to be sure that whatever you're doing is compliant with whatever regulations they provide for your organization. So you wouldn't want to be conducting a program that did something that was contradictory to the regulations that the agency that oversees you has in place. So oftentimes when we're doing continuing ed programs, you're going to look for continuing education units, CEUs, and we want to offer those whenever you do a program. Most of the time those are through ANCC. And ANCC is very specific about how they want you to apply for continuing ed program credits. And that's done most of the time through a magnet hospital. So if you're local and we're talking about Syracuse area, that would be through St. Joseph's Hospital, and there's a whole application process that you would go through. But that's one of the things that's an external frame factor that you want to think about, is regulation and accreditation and how your program will be in connection with that. The last thing you're going to look at as a frame factor is the need for the program. What has changed or what has occurred that's making you believe that this program is needed right now? Why is this education being provided at this point in time? Sometimes you have to look at that and say, oftentimes in hospital settings in particular, we're doing programs and developing programs for continuing education because of a corrective action. Sometimes we've done something wrong or we need to improve in some area, and you're going to develop your program around the corrective action. So the reason for the program is an important part when you're writing up your frame factors, to say it's more like your rationale for why you're developing the program. All right, the rest of the frame factors are called internal frame factors, and they will be things that are about the underlying agency or organization where you are going to perform this program. So you want to know what the mission and philosophy is. You need to have that as part of any educational program, because you want to be sure that your program goals and objectives align with the mission and philosophy of the organization where you're presenting. So for instance, if you were doing an in-service or a continuing ed program at St. Joseph's Hospital, and they were your the organization for which you were going to do the presentation, there are certain topics that would be inappropriate for you to do there because they are obviously against the mission and philosophy of the hospital. For instance, you wouldn't plan to do a continuing ed program on late-term abortion at St. Joseph's because their mission and philosophy differ from that. And you have to be sure that they're aligned, or you're going to have difficulty in getting support for doing your program. Second thing are the educational needs of the staff. You need to know what the education level, the work experience, and the other skills are that the people who are attending your program are bringing with them. So you have to be sure if you're doing a program that is for nursing and it's tailored to the registered nurse, you want to know that when you're advertising your program, that that's who's invited. If you have a mixed audience, you have to be sure that the content for your program can address both or all levels of staff that are there. And you want to be sure, part of the reason for that is because it's never a good thing to have a program and have differing levels of staff, but you're speaking to only one level in the audience. So if you have nurses, you have licensed and unlicensed people attending a nursing in-service, you have to be sure that you're speaking in a way that both levels of people, both backgrounds, both levels of education can understand the content. And frequently, we as nurses tend to speak to nurses. And so if you're doing program development, you want to be sure that you've looked at the internal framework for your educational needs of your staff. The last is the economics and resources of the institution. Is there economic support? Sometimes we as nurses tend to think that we can just go off and do things and you don't have to have any background, you don't have to have any support. It doesn't matter if it costs anything. And we have to change that mindset. You should always be looking at the financial resources that are available to you to present the program, reimbursement for your time and your efforts, and also is there a return on the investment? Are you doing a program that is really for fun or for your interest versus for the benefit of the organization? And so you always want to be thinking about this as a financial endeavor because it's a time draining and time intensive endeavor to do a continuing ed program. Okay, so CEUs. I'm not going to really talk about those much because I already mentioned them, but the American Nurses Credentialing Center, they're the only CEUs that basically are worth obtaining. Everybody needs CEUs for their certification and to maintain certification and to recertify. And so if we're going to do programming, we should always be offering them. There are CEUs offered through AACN and CCNE, but they're not recognized by ANCC. So as nurses, if we're doing in-servicing and we want to support our nurses in their certification, you should always be applying for CEUs and do them through ANCC. Okay, the application process for the presenter. I'm bringing this up because first, I'm going to repeat myself, you should always offer CEUs if you're doing any kind of a presentation. It's professional. It makes the people come feel like they're getting something more out of your program and that your program has value to it. So oftentimes we tend to do in-services and we do programs and we don't value our own time and our own knowledge on the topic. And the way you present to your audience that you do have value is by offering CEUs. So I've got here a list of things that you will have to do as the presenter on the CEU application. And they're things that for your program that you're going to write as an assignment, you'll also want to think about because I'm expecting this list of things will be included in your final project. So anybody who's, a lot of this reflects back to Nursing 561 or 461 where you did teaching and learning. So you need to have a purpose for the course and you need to have a title and a target audience. You want to have learning objectives. You want to have key points and topics with sufficient detail to support each objective. You need to have time frames so you know how long your presentation is going to be. You need to use creative teaching strategies. There's nothing worse, as you know from listening to this, than sitting and just hearing somebody talk and talk and talk. You need to have other things that you do to draw your audience in. And the last thing that might be unusual for you is if you're a presenter, you need to have a CV that includes if you have any financial influences or any other financial obligation from or any other financial things that gain that you get from any companies or corporations. The reason for that is because they want to know if you're doing a presentation that is influenced by any other factors. So oftentimes you've probably seen when you've attended in-services that physicians sometimes have sponsorship from different pharmaceutical companies and they have to claim that right up front, and you have to write that on your CV if you are involved in any of that. Most of you at this point probably don't have that, but going forward you could in the future. Sometimes that becomes an issue for the CEU application. So just know that you would need to include that on a CV. Okay, the other things you're going to include, and they're outlined in your book, evaluation methods. They're summative and formative. Summative evaluation differs from formative, and its purpose is to assess and judge the final outcome of the teaching. So you want to know from your summative evaluation, what did people do with this information? Did it influence them in any way? So, you know, sometimes that's hard to measure. So oftentimes when we're doing in-services in hospital settings particularly, the only thing we can gauge it by is if we do further work down the road and say, okay, I in-serviced people in this area, and now I'm going to do some audits, or I'm going to do some kind of survey after the fact to see if that information was helpful and if it's being used. That's a summative evaluation. So you're really looking at the sum of everything that you did, and did it achieve its purpose down the road. The formative evaluation is much more looking at the process. You're really looking at what strategies did you use, were they effective, and how did my presentation come across to people. So you can do that through a course evaluation. You can do your own critique. You can do a critique of the course and a critique of the teaching. Sometimes it's just as easy to get the impression from the students or whoever's attending the program and say, did this meet your expectations? A simple little summary at the end, a little course evaluation. You never want to do a presentation and not have some kind of evaluation of it, because that gives you two messages. First, it says to people, I'm above evaluation and I don't value your feedback. And the second thing is, you don't improve if you don't get some feedback. So I don't care how many times you've done something, how much of an expert you are on the topic, you should always have some form of formative evaluation at the end. Okay, I hope those slides were helpful to you, and they should line up nicely with the readings from your book and as you work on your project for your continuing ed program.